Okay, so now that we are kind of finishing up our research and we have found those 4 sources that we have gathered where each of these authors have written an article or done some research focused on that same social behavior that we identified in our autoethnography. Again, we are carrying that forward and not just relying on our perspective alone, even though our perspective is very, very important. We are also going to listen to what other experts have to say about that same behavior so we can avoid that danger of a single story, so we can have a more multifaceted and more accurate view of what that behavior looks like. And so, as we are combining these sources and creating this synopsis of research, which is really just a research report for an academic audience, we also need to include an introduction to that synopsis so that our audience will know what they are about to read and why it matters, why it's meaningful. And so pulling some of the instructions from the overall about that synopsis that focus on the introduction, this is what we are expected to do here. All right, so that introduction is going to open with a broad statement that introduces the social behavior being discussed. So remember, our audience, our reader, that academic reader, let's say they're picking up that paper. Let's say this is the paper. They have no idea what they're about to read. And if you start off really with some specifics, they'll immediately be confused because they need to have some time to acclimate to what is being written about. They need to almost like a gentle invitation into the world of this paper. And so start your introduction off with a more broad sentence that addresses, maybe introduces the social behavior that you identified in a more broad aspect of it, in a more broad manner. And I'll share a great handout on just how to do that also in this module. But we're going to open up broadly to just kind of invite the reader into the topic, the general topic of our synopsis that we are doing our research on. And then you're going to explain why it's important to look at this social behavior, why it's important to look at what researchers have to say about this social behavior. Then I am asking you to also identify 1 or 2 common points of discussion that you have identified as you have read over these sources through these articles that you have gathered, because that's important. When you identify a couple of the common points of discussion where authors have talked about the same things, then those points, those similar points, are really meaningful. And then you're going to introduce the synopsis. And so I want to show you, kind of talk a little bit more about how to identify those common points of discussion, how to write them out in an introduction that would be meaningful to the reader. I like this image right here, just to kind of show you in a different way what we are doing here. It's kind of, I like pictures, so it helps me. And so this first thing that we have been doing is this research, secondary research, where we are going out and we're gathering the research of others. We are gathering them together. We're identifying them and listening to what these authors have written, what they have to say. We're bringing them together in one project, into one conversation. And then we are simply going to introduce what we have done, introduce what we have found to an academic audience. And so in doing that, this requires an act called synthesis. And I'm emphasizing this word, this concept, because it is one of the outcomes of this course, being able to synthesize different ideas into a new whole, into a new argument. And so what synthesis means, I like the analogy of baking, because synthesis simply means taking separate entities, separate things, and bringing them together into a new whole. And so baking is perfect, because if you're going to bake a cake, you are going to go out and you're going to gather together all of these ingredients that are really unique on their own. So you've got eggs, baking powder, flour, sugar, chocolate, maybe some milk or cream, and vanilla, all of these different individual and unique ingredients. And you're going to combine them in a way that they are going to create something completely new. So if I'm going to slice into this cake over here, it looks so great, but if I'm going to slice into it, I do not want to come across a layer of baking powder, a layer of flour, a separate layer of sugar. You don't want those ingredients to retain their unique characteristics. You want them to be combined into something new. And so that's what we do when we do research and when we gather research together. And when we eventually create an essay or make an argument, we are taking information, different opinions out there concerning this social behavior. And we are, I mean, these authors are, it's very likely that they don't even know one another, that they have never talked with one another, but they are still in conversation with one another simply through the act of writing about the same things and offering their different perspectives on the same social behavior. And so we are taking those separate arguments, those separate articles where people have written their findings from their research or their opinions, and we are bringing them together into this new project and eventually into this synopsis and to an essay. And so we're going to use a method that I think is really helpful in learning how to bring them together, but also being able to identify those common points of discussion. And it's called the SOAR method. It stands for select, organize, associate, and reasoning. And it's a mapping. It's called a cognitive mapping exercise. And so here's a template, and I've shared the template in the module, but I'm just going to show you here what each stands for. So again, we're selecting different articles. We're going to organize those articles. We're going to find associations between the points that the authors make, and then we're going to use our reasoning to name those common points of discussion. And what we are simply going to do, I've got the map right here, and I've got this other slide. We're going to start off with a blank piece of paper. And you are going to, right across the top, well, I'll go back here, it's a little bit bigger. Across the top, there are 5 in this example, but you only need 4. But you're going to write the author's name of the sources that you've gathered. And then right here, what type of source is it? And what's the title? Is it a book? Is it a magazine? Is it a website? Is it a report? Write that down here. And then write down what is the author's main argument that they make in this article or essay. Okay, what we are doing right here, we are selecting and we are organizing all of this content that we have gathered, and we're placing it into one space, onto one sheet of paper, so that we can like see it all at once. This is such a helpful method when we have a lot of information to organize that can kind of stay kind of chaotic in our head, unless we use some kind of method like this where we get it down on a piece of paper and we organize it. All right. And then we are going to list out each point that is being made in each of these articles. Maybe one of the articles the author's only made 2 or 3 points. Maybe another article, that author had like 5 main points that they made. You just read through the article and see what things that they talk about, and you'll list them here. And then comes the point where we start looking for associations. Now that we have all of those points all on one sheet of paper, all in front of us, we can go through and we can see, okay, well, this author, their 4th point is the same as the second author's 2nd point. And this author over here, they also talk about that point. And so I'm going to write down that common point of discussion. What are they talking about? And I'm going to draw lines from all of the authors that talk about that common point of discussion. And I'm going to do the same here. Maybe I can find that the 2nd and 3rd and 4th author, they talk about another point that is different. I'm going to write down that other point that these guys talk about. And so I'll do that until I have a few common points of discussion that I see that at least, 2 or 3 of these authors talk about individually in their separate articles. And that will give me those common points of discussion. That means that these are the important points that are out there in the research. And you're going to pick one of those. So you'll find those common points of discussion, and you'll refer to those common points of discussion in your introduction. If you go back here, remember, in the introduction, you're going to identify some of those common points of discussion, at least one. You don't have time to do many more, but 1 or 2 of those common points of discussion, just so your audience knows, kind of the key takeaways from this synopsis of research. And so Here are some examples of other students who've done this SOAR mapping. It can be kind of messy. It doesn't have to all look the same. It doesn't have to be pretty. I have other students who do it quite neatly, where it's like, okay, here are the points from this author. Here are the points from this author. Okay, I can see that these two talk about a point that they have in similar. These other three have a point that they have in similar. And you'll pick one or two of those to describe in your essay. You'll share, here's one point of discussion. For instance, you know, so-and-so says this about it, so-and-so says this about it, so-and-so says this about it. So you kind of describe that common point of discussion. And that whole act of synthesis, here's a couple examples of it in written form. So in these, I have two, one here and one here, and these are just little paragraphs. This is what you're going to be doing in that introduction, just the section of that introduction where you will share that common point of discussion, and that will probably be a topic sentence for one of the paragraphs in your introduction. That brings up one important point. An introduction is rarely going to be a single paragraph. Our introduction to this synopsis is more likely to be, you know, 2 or 3 paragraphs. And so you will have that common point of discussion that you share right here. This is about immigration, conversations about immigration. You'll have that common point of discussion that you'll write out as a topic sentence. Okay. And then you'll explain what each of the authors say about that. This one just brings in 2 of the authors and kind of writes up a little synopsis of what they say about that common point of discussion. Here's another one. This one is about healthy eating. Parents are always finding ways to encourage healthy eating in their children. Different scientists and educators have different strategies for promoting a well-rounded diet. So that is the common point of discussion. It describes what a common point among the researchers. So it mentions the researchers, it mentions the scientists and the educators in a more general way in that topic sentence. And then this one, let's see, this one has 3 different articles that they synthesize. First one is what does David R. Just and Joseph Price have to say about this? And then similarly, this is what somebody else says. And let's see, here's what the third one says, and so forth. You're just describing what these people said about that common point of discussion. And so the SOAR mapping method is going to be key in identifying those common points of discussion. Okay.